It's not much fun to be constantly reminded of your every fault and mistake without new choices in your behavior.
You can also negotiate with the voice about when it offers you feedback. Ask the voice to give you feedback and suggestions after you've completed your performance. Usually that's much more useful than when you're in the middle of something. Many top-performing athletes will hum a tune or repeat a positive phrase over and over in their minds so they can keep their confidence levels high. These athletes say you're less likely to listen to the voice that offers criticism if you do that during a performance.
Now that you've tuned into your internal voices and the kinds of things you say to yourself, you'll find it easy to listen to the patterns of speech that can get in the way of your personal effectiveness. There's a story about a scraggly-looking man who, when digging in the Arabian desert, came across a treasure chest that was guarded by a genie. The genie told the man that the chest was full of all sorts of exotic treasures: gold, jewelry, heirlooms, and silk. In order to claim all the wealth in the treasure chest, the man needed to do only one thing: avoid thinking of the color blue as he opened the chest. The man chuckled with glee at the ease of the assignment and repeated over and over, "Don't think of blue, don't think of blue," as he opened the chest.
Obviously, he failed to obtain the treasure.
Repeat the following statements in your head. Become aware of the pictures and feelings they generate.
Don't think about how angry you are about what your boss just said to you.
Or, don't notice the sensation in your stomach right now.
Or how about, don't get nervous about this, whatever you do.
Part of our brain does not understand negations. Negations are the negative, the not in a sentence.
Instead of telling yourself what not to do, use language stated in the affirmative, in the positive. So instead of saying to yourself, don't get nervous about this, whatever you do,
say,
I'm feeling calm and relaxed.
This way you direct yourself to feel resourceful rather than uptight. There are other internal language patterns that can interfere with feeling self-confident.
Do you ever use these statements on yourself? I never do anything right. I'm a crummy, rotten parent. Everybody always rejects me. I might as well give up. I'm just a failure.
As you listen to these statements, what happens to your emotional state? It feels hopeless, doesn't it? Instead of putting yourself down, you can focus on the behaviors you want to change. Next time, check your emotional state using the following method for questioning your self-talk.
I never do anything right.
Really? Never? You mean there's never been a time when you did something right? What specifically did you do that did not turn out well?
I've done some things right. Actually, many things. Only once in a while do I really goof up. Wow, that's like using a zoom lens. It really changes my experience. By now, you might be realizing that one important function of your internal voices is to create internal pictures and movies, and thus, your emotions.
We've already dealt with how your own internal criticism can rob you of confidence. Now we want to turn to dealing with other people's criticism, because that can be equally devastating. We often teach the next technique in our business trainings because it's such a big issue in the workplace. The technique is called A Strategy for Responding to Criticism. For more information about it, refer to the book Heart of the Mind by Steve and Connie Ray Andreas.
We have a friend who's the head of training and organizational development for a large bank. The other day, when we went to lunch with him, he was feeling quite down on himself because of something that kept happening at work.
His boss, the CEO of the bank, was being critical of him, and he didn't know how to react to the criticism without becoming defensive. He said he just got a gut-wrenching pain in his stomach whenever the boss criticized him. Then he'd become defensive, feel depressed, and end up being unproductive for the rest of the day.
We suggested that he step back and see himself being criticized by his boss, in his mind's eye, and actually run a movie of his boss criticizing him. This allowed him to listen to what his boss was saying without getting all uptight and defensive. We then had him compare what his boss was saying he had done with what he thought he had done. His boss kept saying he wasn't a team player because he missed parts of certain meetings.
Our friend thought about this and said, but I only missed the part of the meetings that don't directly relate to my department. Then he thought, but it must seem to the others that I'm not supporting them, and they don't have a way of knowing what I'm doing when I'm not there. He realized that a part of his boss's criticism was valid feedback.
He just hadn't been able to hear it before because he became defensive so quickly. We had him think about how he wanted to respond to his boss. He thought of an appropriate response and then ran a rehearsal movie of himself interacting with his boss. We had him carefully notice his boss's reaction. He also imagined himself either attending the meetings or explaining to the management team why he would be missing from them. This helped to program his memory to follow through and make use of the feedback that his boss had given him. When we were through, he realized he was feeling more positive about his boss.
What he hadn't yet realized was that by rethinking how he responded to criticism in this particular way, he had reprogrammed his brain so that in the future, whenever he'd be faced with criticism, he'd step back, evaluate the criticism, think of an appropriate response, deliver it, and consider how to utilize any useful feedback.
You can reprogram your brain like our friend did by practicing the following technique.
Begin by recalling a recent criticism that you reacted badly to, or you didn't like the way you responded. Pick a mild criticism for learning this technique.
See yourself about to be criticized by someone, and as soon as you recognize that it's criticism, dissociate. Most people find it easiest to do this visually. As you begin to receive the criticism, you can imagine stepping out of your body to the side, see yourself surrounded by a plexiglass shield, or see the critical words being printed out in a cartoon balloon.
This kind of dissociation prevents immediate bad feelings and also provides objectivity. After you've dissociated, make a detailed movie of the criticism. Then watch the movie, seeing that you out there, hearing what the critic is saying. What does the person mean? If you don't have enough information to make a clear movie, see yourself asking the critic for more information. Now that you have their side of the story, make a movie of what you think happened in the situation and compare your movie with what the other person says happened.
Do the movies match or mismatch? They might match only partially, or completely mismatch. Now, based on your comparison of the movies, decide on an appropriate response. There are many different possible responses depending on the circumstances.
You might say, "I'm sorry," or "My intention was to let you know I was concerned," or "From my viewpoint, it looks very different."
Or you might respond, "That's an interesting interpretation of what happened." Or, "Perhaps I could have done that differently." Or even, "Thank you for expressing your opinion."
Choose a response that fits your situation and lets the other person know that you are choosing to remain in control. As you see yourself delivering the response, notice what reaction you get from the other person. You can modify your response until you're pleased with the results.
Next, decide if you want to change your behavior based on the feedback you've just received. If so, see yourself using different behaviors in the future. By future pacing, you'll have these new behaviors available when you get into that type of situation. When you're finished, pull that part of you that learned this new strategy back into your body so that the knowledge of that dissociated part becomes fully a part of you now.
This strategy for responding to criticism can be used when you think that someone might criticize you or when you criticize yourself. The strategy for criticism is effective for detaching from criticism and discovering what useful feedback is available. It allows you to connect with others at a deeper level, and it certainly builds your self-confidence.
Let's move on to another technique for giving you more options in your behavior. We were working with a woman in a negotiation training recently who had the complaint that she wasn't as flexible as she would like to be when dealing with her boss. She mentioned that she was typically very talkative and expressed her feelings openly with people, but she was disappointed that she didn't do that with him.
She recounted an experience in the recent past where she had been called to his office and was told about some drastic change in her job duty as manager of the typing pool. She sat silently and didn't have the courage to give her boss important information that he was lacking. Information that would have made a difference in the decision he made. She felt passive and uncomfortable in that situation and behaved really non-assertively.
We asked her how she would like to feel instead of passive and non-assertive. She said, in control, centered, and intelligent. We had her move her eyes up and begin making pictures of 3 different behaviors she could do in that situation. Behaviors that would help her feel in control, centered, and intelligent.
This is what she told us about her pictures. In the first picture, she saw herself breathing deeply and repeating to herself, "Mind alert, body calm." In her second picture, she imagined switching to second position to gain empathy with her boss. And in her third picture, she was asking what his intentions were first, and then offering the information that he needed to make his decision. When she compared her choices to determine which would work best, she discovered that her first choice of breathing worked best. This helped her to get comfortable enough to follow up with the third choice while in his presence. As
her cue to engage in this new behavior, we had her internally picture her boss across his desk. Then she fully imagined doing this process and having a voice say, "I'll do that one. I can handle the added responsibility."
Her feelings about herself and dealing with her boss changed dramatically after doing this technique.
Let's have you do this technique now. It's called the frustration into flexibility technique. Find a situation in the past where you weren't performing the way you wanted to. First, step back into the situation long enough to notice what feelings you're having. Then, label your feelings. Give them a name like confused, frightened, anxious, spacey, fearful. Just give the emotions a name.
Now, detach from the event and watch yourself behaving in whatever way you behaved at the time. At this point, you're gathering information. As you watch this scene, ask yourself what emotion, what feeling you'd like to be experiencing in that context. Keeping that emotion in mind, see yourself doing different behaviors in that scene that could give you that feeling you want. It's easier to create pictures when looking up, so move the gaze of your eyes upward as you do this.
Take the time to see yourself doing at least 3 behaviors in that situation that are different from what you did in the past. Make one of your choices outrageous and humorous, something that you wouldn't have considered in the past. This will add to your flexibility. Take all the time you need to do this.
Next, we want you to compare your 3 alternatives. Step into,
In other words, associate,
into the behavior you thought of first, and imagine you're in that situation behaving that way. Get your body into it. How intensely does this behavior create the emotion you want?
Now just let that choice go and step into the next behavior you imagined, checking the intensity of the emotion created in that choice. Compare these 2 choices. Which gives you the stronger emotion, or seems like the best choice? Code this one as the front runner and then let it go. Now, step into the final choice, checking the intensity of the emotion created. Compare this choice with the front runner and choose your favorite. As you imagine acting out that behavior, have an enthusiastic internal voice saying, "That's the one I'm going to do."
Let's make it automatic now, using the process called future pacing. Think of an external cue that will be present in the situation. For example, if the situation is public speaking, the cue could be seeing a group of people seated and waiting for you to speak, or seeing a podium in front of you. If you choose dealing with your boss, the cue could be seeing or hearing that person. If you choose dealing with an angry client on the phone, the cue is hearing angry tones on the other end of the line.
First, imagine the cue, and then put yourself right there in the situation, behaving in the new way you've chosen. You're programming that new behavior into the future situation by doing this.
One way to make sure that you are consistently creating new behavioral choices and building your confidence is to build this technique in as a daily review. Here's how. Before drifting off to sleep at night, run a movie of your day and the activities that you did during the day. Stop when you come to a scene in the movie where you're not pleased with your behavior. Run this process you just learned on that scene. So picture your external cue and then put yourself in the situation exhibiting the new behavior. You will build in a new, more resourceful behavior for the future. This way you're constantly reviewing your actions with the intention of changing those behaviors that don't work for you. This takes what you might have considered failure and turns it into feedback. Feedback about changes and improvements that you can make.
Utilizing this daily review in the way we've just described has given me an incredible sense of control over myself and the way I behave in the world. It's a great confidence booster.
There's a slogan that we heard years ago when we were first introduced to NLP that's been very useful to us also. And that's, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first.
Many of us set such incredibly high standards for ourselves that we stop ourselves from attempting something new, such as skiing, writing poetry, or using a computer, because we're afraid we won't do it perfectly at first. Think of what your life would be like now if you had stopped yourself from trying new things when you were young. Imagine that as you were learning to walk, you pulled yourself up to a chair, took a wobbly step forward, and fell. And you thought, well, I'm not going to try that again. I must have looked like a real jerk. Life would be very interesting. You'd still be crawling around on all fours.
At those youthful stages, you kept on trying until you got things to work. Keep in mind, as you're learning something new, that using the feedback you're getting is one of the most important elements to learning.
Sometimes we lack confidence for a very good reason, because we don't have the competency to do something well. For example, I lack confidence in my ability to fly an airplane, because I've never done it. All the confidence in the world won't make me a safe pilot. You probably don't want to fly with me until I've learned the appropriate skills.
Or, have you ever listened to a confident speaker who bored you because he wasn't competent to speak on the subject matter? What does it take to become competent, really good at something? Let's explore a task you can do really easily and skillfully, like driving an automobile. Think about the first time you ever drove a car. You probably felt a little overwhelmed at all the things you had to consciously do in order to make the car go down the street, especially if that car had a stick shift. You were sitting there, trying to steer, looking out the windshield, looking in the rearview mirror, coordinating the clutch and the gas, and trying to follow the rules of the road at the same time your dad was yelling at you.
If you were like me, you probably killed the engine 2 or 3 times before you ever got it going.
Now, some time and experience later, you can jump in your car and drive 50 miles or so on the interstate without even thinking about what you're doing or where you're going. Have you ever experienced sailing past a freeway exit you were supposed to take?
Who's driving the car? You've developed a part of you that can drive it automatically and presumably safely, even without having to consciously think about it. You've streamlined your behavior to become competent at driving your car.
Your brain does similar processes with everything you learn. You use the same brain skills for learning to drive a car that you used for learning to be self-critical or lacking self-confidence in certain situations. By now, you've learned that your brain is always doing the best it can, and that you can count on it to do what it has learned how to do. That is, until you use your brain's own language to change the instructions.
By taking the time to teach your brain different and effective ways of thinking, you're giving yourself a truly valuable gift. There's no end to the new choices you can create for yourself.
Practice the NLP techniques offered in this program and continue to enjoy your